Picture a two-lane road at dusk. Blue Ridge tree line bleeding into dark, mile markers ticking past, a pair of brake lights going red, then gone. Virginia looks like a postcard from up here. But these same roads, these same college towns, these same parkways and river bends, they're also where people walked out of frame and never came back. 10 people, 10 Virginia places. Roads, malls, parkways, a cruise ship, and a set of doors that never opened again. Pull up the map, lock your doors, and let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe. New cases drop every week, and we go deep on every single one. October 17th, 2009. John Paul Jones Arena, University of Virginia, Charlottesville. Metallica is in town, and the arena is packed. Thousands of people pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Noise bouncing off every wall, the crowd moving like a single organism every time the guitars hit. Virginia Tech is about an hour and a half southwest of Charlottesville, and Morgan Dana Harrington made that drive specifically for this show. She was 20 years old, a junior studying art and science, a Roanoke native who grew up with music running through the center of her life. People who knew her described her as warm and open, the kind of person who talked to strangers easily and laughed without hesitating, who made a room feel larger just by being in it. She had been looking forward to this concert. She was there with a group of friends, people she trusted, people who had every reason to expect to drive home together at the end of the night. The evening, by every account, starts exactly the way a concert night is supposed to start. Loud, crowded, and lit up with the particular happiness that comes from being in a room with thousands of people who all want the same thing at the same time. Here is where you have to slow down and pay attention to a single, mundane detail, because it is the hinge on which everything that follows turns. Somewhere early in the show, accounts suggest during the opening act, Morgan steps away to find a restroom. A simple, completely ordinary thing to do at a packed arena on a Saturday night. She threads through the crowd, works her way toward the concourse, and finds what she needs. But when she tries to get back in, arena staff stop her at the door. The John Paul Jones Arena had a strict no re-entry policy in effect that night, and Morgan had crossed the threshold going the wrong direction. She was outside, the show was inside, her friends were inside, and the doors, as far as arena policy was concerned, were closed to her. This is where it stops being normal. She calls her friends from her cell phone at 8:48 p.m. She tells them she's been locked out. The tone of the call, by the accounts of those who received it, was frustrated but not frightened. She was annoyed, looking for a solution, working the problem the way you do when something inconvenient happens on a night that was supposed to be fun. She tells them she'll find her own way home. Her friends, still inside the arena with the show in full swing and the crowd loud around them, assume she'll manage. They assume she'll call a cab, find a ride, do what a resourceful 20-year-old does when plans shift unexpectedly. There is no reason, at 8:48 p.m., on a busy concert night outside a sold-out arena, for any of this to feel like a last phone call. But that is exactly what it was. That call, 8 minutes to 9 in the evening, standing outside a building full of people while Metallica played on, is the last verified contact anyone had with Morgan Harrington. Now the geography matters, because it shapes everything that follows. John Paul Jones Arena sits on the western edge of UVA's grounds, and from outside its walls, especially at night, during a sold-out event when every light and every pair of eyes is pointed inward at the stage, the surrounding parking lots, access roads, and underpasses can feel strangely isolated in a way that's hard to explain until you've stood there yourself. The energy of the event doesn't reach the outside. You go from deafening to quiet in about 20 feet. Between the arena complex and the older sections of campus runs Copley Road. and along that road sits a bridge crossing above a set of railroad tracks. It's not a dramatic structure, it's not a landmark. It's the kind of overpass you drive across without registering it exists. But on the night of October 17, 2009, it became one of the most consequential pieces of geography in this entire investigation. At approximately 9:30 p.m., roughly 40 minutes after that last phone call, witnesses reported seeing a young woman on or near the Copley Road Bridge who matched Morgan's description. And here is the critical detail. She appeared to be attempting to hitchhike. Standing near the road in the dark, trying to flag down a passing car. A 20-year-old woman locked out of a concert, trying to solve a transportation problem the only way she could think of in that moment. On a dark road, a half-mile from the arena, while the show thundered on behind her. No one has ever confirmed with certainty whether a car stopped. No witness has come forward to say they saw her get into a vehicle. No driver ever went to police and said they picked her up. That moment on the bridge, a young woman raising her hand toward oncoming headlights, is essentially where the public record goes quiet. What investigators found in the days that followed was this. In a small parking area positioned between the arena and an adjacent athletic facility, Morgan's purse and her cell phone were recovered. The location was close enough to the arena to suggest she had been there shortly after the lockout. There was no sign of a struggle at the site. No blood, nothing overturned, nothing that told an obvious story about how those items ended up separated from their owner. The purse had not been ransacked. Her identification and other personal items were still inside it. Whatever happened at that location, it did not look on the surface like a robbery or a fight. But the cell phone. Here's what doesn't make sense. The phone had been found with the battery removed. Not cracked from a fall, not smashed. The battery had been deliberately separated from the device and set apart from it. Think carefully about what that means in practice. A person in genuine panic, someone desperately trying to reach her friends, to call a cab, to dial 911, does not stop to remove her own battery. The only functional consequence of pulling a battery out of a phone in 2009 is to render it completely dark. No GPS signal, no incoming call, no ping for a cell tower to log, no data point for investigators to find later. Whoever last handled that phone, and we cannot say with absolute certainty that it was Morgan alone who touched it last, understood exactly what removing the battery would accomplish. That knowledge, embedded in such a small physical act, is one of the most unsettling details in this entire case. Now layer that against the setting one more time. The Copley Road Bridge and its surrounding area, while certainly darker than the lit arena, were not remote wilderness. Charlottesville is a university city. October 17th was a Saturday night, a sold-out concert night. And the roads and lots around JPJ were cycling through thousands of arriving and departing vehicles for hours on either side of the show. People drove those roads constantly. Students and concert-goers moved through those lots. Rideshare and cab drivers idled in those parking areas all evening. Yet, in the gap between 8:48 p.m., the last phone call, and the bridge sighting around 9:30 p.m., and then through the long silence that swallowed everything after that, not a single witness came forward with anything that explained how Morgan went from standing near the road with her hand up to completely, absolutely unreachable. The search that followed was one of the largest in Charlottesville's recent memory. Ground teams swept the arena perimeter, Copley Road, and adjacent neighborhoods in expanding grids. Search dogs were deployed and found no continuous trail to follow in any useful direction. An aerial search was launched and eventually stood down when it produced nothing actionable. Flyers with Morgan's face went up across the city and surrounding counties within days. Her parents, Gil and Dan Harrington, went public immediately and stayed public, holding press conferences, maintaining an active online presence, pushing the investigation forward with the particular, exhausting determination of parents who refused to let a case go cold. They kept Morgan's name in circulation for months when the news cycle had every incentive to move on. 3 months passed. Searches wound down. Winter settled over Charlottesville. On January 26, 2010, a farmer named David Bass was walking the fields of a property called Anchorage Farm in southern Albemarle County, roughly 10 miles from the John Paul Jones Arena as the crow flies. In a remote section of that farmland, more than 1.5 miles from the nearest accessible road, Bass discovered skeletal remains. They were in a location that no standard search grid, bounded by the arena, the bridge, and the surrounding neighborhoods, would have naturally reached. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Morgan Harrington. The evidence indicated she had been placed there on or very close to the night she disappeared. 10 miles from the arena, 1.5 miles from any road. Let that distance sit with you for a moment, because it tells you something specific. Getting a person to that location in the dark requires either intimate knowledge of that land or deliberate, premeditated navigation of it. This was not a random place. The investigation ultimately produced a name. DNA evidence recovered from the scene was matched to Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., a Charlottesville man working as a cab driver and in other roles connected to the university. When UVA student Hannah Graham disappeared from the downtown mall in 2014, a case we'll get to, Matthew was arrested, and the forensic thread connecting him to Morgan's case was established. He was convicted of both murders and is currently serving multiple life sentences in Virginia State Prison. But the conviction, as complete as it is, doesn't fully illuminate the night of October 17th for the public record. We know the arena, we know the bridge, we know the parking area and the phone with its battery pulled. We know a remote hayfield 10 miles away. What lives in the space between those fixed points, that window where a woman went from "I'll find my own way home" to completely unreachable, has never been reconstructed minute by minute in any public account. That gap is where the dread lives, and it always will. Picture the Copley Road Bridge on a cold January morning, 3 months after the searches ended. Ribbons tied to the guardrail sometime during those weeks. Sun faded now. And in that small parking area nearby, the ghost outline of a phone lying on the pavement, battery beside it, unable to ring even if someone had tried. She was taken from a crowd of thousands. The next one vanished with no crowd at all, straight out of her own living room in the dead of night, in a small town where people still felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked. Just after midnight on September 13th, 2010, Lindsay Drive, in the small town of Orange, Virginia. A quiet community in Orange County, about an hour northeast of Charlottesville and roughly an hour southwest of Washington, D.C. Orange is the kind of place where people know their neighbors' names and leave their cars unlocked overnight without thinking twice about it. The streets go dark early. The neighborhood where Samantha Clark lived is residential in the way that word means something specific in a small Virginia town. Modest houses set back from the road, porch lights left on out of habit, the kind of sidewalks where kids ride bikes in the afternoon and nobody locks their front door until they go to bed. It is, by every external measure, a place where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen, which is exactly what makes what happened here so difficult to sit with. Samantha Ann Clark was 19 years old. She had graduated from Orange County High School the previous year, and by the accounts of people who knew her, she was a homebody. Not in a reclusive or unhappy way, but in the way of someone who was genuinely comfortable at home, who didn't seek out nightlife or late-night adventures for their own sake. She had no driver's license and no cell phone. Those two details are not incidental. They define the shape of her world in very concrete terms. Without a car and without a phone, your range is limited to who can drive you somewhere and who can reach you at a landline. Your social geography shrinks to the people and places within walking distance or a short ride. Her life, as best as it has been described publicly, was oriented around her immediate environment, her family, and the small geography of the town she'd grown up in. There was nothing about her behavior in the days and weeks leading up to September 13th that suggested she was planning to go anywhere unusual, or that anything in her life had shifted in a way that would predict what came next. The night itself starts with a phone call. At some point just after midnight, Samantha receives a call. The nature of that call and who placed it have never been confirmed publicly, though investigators have indicated it is a significant piece of the puzzle they have been working quietly for over a decade. What we know is what happened immediately after she answered it. Samantha gets up, goes to her 12-year-old brother's room, and wakes him. She tells him she's leaving and that she'll be back in the morning. She says it plainly and calmly, the way you tell someone something that isn't complicated. As though the answer to whatever that phone call contained is simple enough that she can resolve it in a matter of hours and be home before the rest of the house wakes up. This is where it stops being normal. Think carefully about what Samantha took with her when she walked out of that house. She did not take her purse. She did not take her identification. She did not take any money that investigators were later able to account for. She did not take a change of clothes or anything that would suggest she was planning to be gone for any meaningful length of time. She left her pajamas folded on the bed. And that detail matters more than it might initially seem. Because people who fold their pajamas before leaving are not people who expect to be gone long enough to need them again. They are people who are planning to come back to the same room, the same bed, the same ordinary morning. The only thing Samantha Clark took with her when she walked out of her house just after midnight on September 13th, 2010, was her house key. Let that be the image for a moment. Everything stays: the ID, the money, the clothes, the phone she didn't have anyway. The one thing she takes is the item you only need if you plan to return. A key is not a thing you bring for someone else's benefit. It is not a thing you grab out of instinct when you're running from something. A key is what you take when you fully intend to come back and let yourself in. She was never seen again. The family reported her missing on September 15th, 2 days after she walked out the door. The delay is not unusual in cases involving young adults, where the initial and often reasonable assumption is that the person left voluntarily and will return when they're ready, particularly when there's been no sign of a struggle and no obvious immediate threat. But in a case with this particular set of facts, no car, no cell phone, a girl who specifically told her little brother she'd be home in the morning, 2 days is a significant window. By the time investigators were formally mobilized and working the case, any physical trace at the departure point on Lindsay Drive, any evidence of where she went from the sidewalk in front of the house, was already days old. The neighborhood had cycled through 2 full days of ordinary life: rain, foot traffic, and time. All of it working against the kind of forensic picture that might have told investigators something useful about direction, about a vehicle, about who or what she walked toward. The search that followed stretched across central Virginia. Teams covered ground in Orange County and pushed outward into surrounding areas, working expanding grids through the county and into adjacent jurisdictions. Chris Green Lake, a reservoir in Albemarle County about 30 miles to the south, was among the locations searched, a significant enough detail that investigators clearly weren't limiting their thinking to Orange County alone. The case generated local and regional attention, but it did not produce Samantha. No physical evidence surfaced that pointed investigators toward a location or a person with any actionable clarity. Here's the critical detail about how this case evolved over the following decade. For years, it sat officially classified as a missing persons case, carrying with it the bureaucratic weight of unresolved ambiguity, the legal and investigative posture that says, "We don't know what happened. The file stays open. We wait for new information." Then, in 2021, 11 years after that midnight walk down Lindsay Drive, the Culpeper County Sheriff's Office, which had assumed investigative jurisdiction, officially reclassified the case. It was no longer a missing persons investigation. Investigators announced publicly that it was now being treated as an abduction and murder case. That reclassification is not a formality. It reflects a specific investigative determination that, based on evidence investigators have gathered but not fully disclosed, they believe Samantha did not leave voluntarily, did not choose to disappear into a new life somewhere, and is almost certainly dead. The reclassification is a public statement in bureaucratic language that someone took her. Now here is where a name enters the case. Publicly, investigators and news reporting have focused significant attention on a man named Randy Taylor, a man who would later become central to another Virginia disappearance along Route 29, a case we will reach in this video. Taylor's name has appeared in connection with Samantha Clark's disappearance across multiple news outlets and investigative reports, with sources characterizing him as a person of serious investigative interest. It is absolutely essential to state clearly what that means and what it does not mean. As of the available public record, Randy Taylor has not been charged in connection with Samantha Clark's disappearance. He has not been arrested for it, has not been tried, and has not been convicted of anything related to her case. His connection to her disappearance, as reflected in public reporting, exists at the level of documented investigative attention and suspicion. Serious, sustained, officially acknowledged suspicion. But legally and formally, it remains unproven. The investigation is open. What the reclassification tells us, and what the specific facts of that night illuminate, is something quietly devastating when you sit with it. A 19-year-old woman who had no car and no phone, who was not by nature or habit someone who went out in the middle of the night, who took the specific trouble to wake her little brother and tell him she'd be back by morning. That woman received a phone call and walked out her front door into the dark. The most charitable reading of that is that she trusted whoever called her enough to go meet them without hesitation, without grabbing anything practical, without the kind of preparation you'd make if you thought the trip might be complicated or long. The least charitable reading, the one that the 2021 reclassification points towards, is that she was being directed somewhere by someone who had planned for her not to come back. Neither reading ends with her safe. And the house key she carried, the key that was for coming home to, suggests she had no idea which story she was walking into. A porch light left on through the night and then through the morning. A small house on Lindsay Drive in a town where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. A folded pair of pajamas on a bed in a room that stayed exactly as she left it. And a door that never opened from the outside again. She left with a key and nowhere to go. The next person left to meet someone. And so did the last man who ever saw them. November 20th, 2012. The 500 block of West Main Street in Charlottesville, Virginia. A stretch of road running alongside the Charlottesville Amtrak station, what locals call Union Station. a mid-century brick building set back from the road where commuters and travelers move through at irregular hours and the platform activity rises and falls with the train schedule. By 6:30 in the evening on a Tuesday in late November, the area carries the particular energy of a place caught between moments. Not the surge of a rush-hour platform, not the emptiness of 2 a.m., but a kind of intermediate busyness. People on the sidewalk, cars moving through the intersection, foot traffic connecting the downtown blocks to the neighborhoods spreading west. It is busy enough to feel public. It is transient enough that nobody is paying close attention to any particular face. Doused Smith, who went by the name Sage, and who had recently begun identifying as a transgender woman, was 19 years old. She was known and loved in Charlottesville. Friends and family described her as vibrant and magnetic, as someone who made an impression, whose presence was felt in a room, and whose absence would be noticed immediately by the people close to her. She had been navigating the particular challenges that come with being young and transgender in a mid-sized Virginia city in 2012. Challenges her community and the people who loved her have spoken about openly and consistently since her disappearance. The people who knew Sage have been clear and vocal about one specific concern: that her identity in 2012 shaped how quickly and how seriously her disappearance was initially treated, and that this is a documented pattern in missing persons cases involving transgender individuals that advocates have pushed law enforcement to address directly. On the evening of November 20th, Sage told a roommate she was going out to meet someone near the train station. The plan, as she described it, was simple and short. Go meet the person, handle whatever needed to be handled, and come back. She left the apartment. She was seen by an acquaintance on the 500 block of West Main Street, close to the station, at approximately 6:30 in the evening. That sighting, a brief, ordinary moment on a public sidewalk, is the last confirmed account of anyone who knew Sage Smith seeing her in person. The person she was going to meet had a name: Eric McFadden. Investigators identified McFadden as the last known contact Sage had arranged to see that evening, the person whose proximity to that street corner and that specific window of time placed him at the center of the investigation almost from the beginning. Here's what doesn't make sense. When investigators moved to speak with McFadden in the immediate aftermath of Sage's disappearance, he initially agreed to an interview, and then did not appear for it. And in the days that followed, McFadden himself could not be located. The man who was supposed to meet Sage Smith on West Main Street had, by every account reaching investigators, left Charlottesville. He was simply gone. Now the case was carrying two absences instead of one. Sage Smith, missing from a busy downtown corridor on a Tuesday evening, and Eric McFadden, missing from the address and the daily life he had been living in the city. One person goes to meet another. Neither one comes back. And on a public street beside a train station where people are constantly moving through, nobody saw anything that explained where either of them went. The Sage Smith case did not move quickly. That is one of the most painful and consistently documented facts about it. And it is something her family and the people who loved her have spoken about with a specificity and a directness that deserves to be reflected honestly here. In the weeks and months after November 20th, 2012, the case drew community attention and advocacy. Vigils were held, flyers went up. People who knew Sage organized and pushed and refused to let her name drift into the background noise of an overloaded missing person system. But institutionally, the pace was slow. The formal investigative resources, the public urgency, the media coverage. By any honest accounting, these did not match what would have surrounded the disappearance of a different 19-year-old from the same street corner under similar circumstances. This is not a peripheral detail. It is central to understanding why this case evolved the way it did. and why the timeline stretches the way it does. Here is what the investigation did establish in the period immediately following her disappearance. Eric McFadden, the man Sage had arranged to meet that evening, the man who agreed to and then did not show up for a police interview, the man who left Charlottesville in the immediate aftermath, was named publicly as a person of interest in the case. That designation means something specific. Investigators believed, based on their work, that McFadden had information material to understanding what happened to Sage Smith. It does not mean he was charged. It does not mean there was sufficient evidence to arrest him. It means that of all the people connected to Sage's life and to that specific evening, law enforcement identified McFadden as the person they most needed to speak with, and that he was not available to speak with. He had, by all available accounts, made himself deliberately unavailable. The combination of those two facts, person of interest and gone, is exactly the kind of thing that keeps an investigation alive even when it produces no forward momentum for years at a stretch. The years passed. Charlottesville moved through its own subsequent traumas. Hannah Graham's disappearance in 2014, the arrest and conviction of Jesse Matthew, the events of 2017, the accumulated weight of a city that keeps getting pulled back into national news cycles for reasons nobody in it would choose. Sage Smith's case remained open. Her family continued to push. Advocates continued to raise the issue of how her identity had shaped the institutional response to her disappearance. And McFadden remained, for years, someone investigators wanted to find and could not locate with any productive result. Then, in November 2016, 4 years after Sage walked out to meet someone on West Main Street, the Charlottesville Police Department made a formal, public announcement. The Sage Smith case was being reclassified. It was no longer classified as a missing persons investigation. It was now an active homicide investigation. That announcement carries a specific evidentiary weight. A reclassification to homicide doesn't happen because investigators feel bad about a case not being resolved. It happens because the people working the case have reached a conclusion based on evidence, on what they know and cannot say publicly, on the accumulated picture built from 4 years of investigative work, that Sage Smith is dead, and that her death was not accidental, and that someone is responsible for it. Charlottesville police said publicly that they believed Sage had been the victim of a homicide. They did not name a perpetrator. They did not announce an imminent arrest. But the reclassification was, in effect, investigators telling the public, "We know what happened here, even if we can't yet prove it in a courtroom." Here's the critical detail that followed from that announcement. Investigators continued to name McFadden as a person of interest. The reclassification to homicide did not produce charges against him, but it did intensify, at least publicly, the articulated need to find him and compel him to speak. And finding him proved to be a sustained and complicated challenge that stretched across multiple additional years and multiple jurisdictions. Now here is where the timeline does something genuinely strange. In 2019, 7 years after Sage's disappearance, McFadden's own family reported him missing, a man who had been a person of interest in a homicide investigation for years, who had left Charlottesville after being asked to speak with investigators, who had been the subject of sustained law enforcement attention across a significant stretch of time. His family filed a missing persons report. 2 people connected by a single planned meeting on a single Tuesday evening in November 2012 were now both, on paper, missing. One had been reclassified as a homicide victim. The other was listed as a missing person, and the thread connecting them ran back to a sidewalk beside a train station in Charlottesville where, at 6:30 in the evening on a weekday, Nobody who came forward afterward could account for what had happened next. The investigation kept moving. Law enforcement tracked McFadden's movements across years and across state lines. The specifics of that tracking have not been fully detailed publicly, but investigators made clear they had never fully lost the thread. They knew at intervals where he had been. They built a picture of a man in motion, moving between cities, not staying anywhere long enough to become findable in the way that most people are findable. Through steady employment, a permanent address, a consistent phone number, a life with enough surface area for law enforcement to grab onto. Instead, McFadden appears to have existed in the gaps of that kind of official visibility for years, which is itself a particular kind of answer to the question of whether someone knows they are being looked for. Then, in 2025, 13 years after Sage Smith left to meet someone on West Main Street, investigators from Charlottesville traveled to Los Angeles. What they found there was McFadden, living under circumstances that investigators have not fully detailed publicly. But here is the specific detail that the reporting captured, and that deserves to sit on its own for a moment. At the time investigators located him, McFadden had been in the process of attempting to change his name. 13 years after a woman he was supposed to meet disappeared from a downtown street corner. 13 years after he left a city that had been looking for him. He was, according to investigators, in the process of making himself harder to find by the most basic available mechanism, changing the name attached to his identity. Charlottesville investigators made contact with McFadden in Los Angeles. As of the most recent available public reporting, he has not been charged in connection with Sage Smith's disappearance or death. The investigation remains open and active. His status as a person of interest, as reflected across the public record, has not changed. The legal and evidentiary gap between what investigators believe and what they can prove in court remains the operative obstacle, which is, in many ways, the most familiar and the most frustrating sentence in any cold case file. We know where the thread leads. We cannot yet tie the knot at the end of it. What remains on West Main Street is a specific and quiet devastation, a platform where trains still arrive and depart on schedule, a sidewalk where an acquaintance saw a young woman for the last time at 6:30 in the evening, an appointment that was never kept or was kept in a way that was never survived. Sage Smith was 19 years old and beloved and known in Charlottesville, and the people who loved her have spent more than a decade holding her name up against the particular silence that descends when institutions move slowly and the news cycle finds other things to be urgent about. They kept pushing. Her case got reclassified. Investigators crossed the country 13 years later to find a man with a new name. 2 empty chairs at a meeting that was supposed to last an hour. If this kind of case matters to you, and if you're still here, it clearly does. Hit subscribe, because we go this deep every single week. A meeting that never happened. The next girl made it to her meeting on camera, recorded on multiple surveillance systems, and still disappeared. August 3rd, 2013. The Liberty gas station in Lovingston, Virginia, a small town in Nelson County, situated directly on United States Route 29, the long north-south corridor that connects Charlottesville to Lynchburg and runs through some of the most rural stretches of the Virginia Piedmont. If you've driven Route 29 through this section, you know the specific geography. The road is wide and fast. The tree line comes right up to the shoulder. The towns along the corridor are small enough that a gas station can feel like the center of everything happening in a 5-mile radius on a given afternoon. Lovingston is the county seat of Nelson County, but by any urban measure, it is a small, quiet place. In the summer of 2013, The Liberty Station was exactly the kind of stop you make on a longer drive. You pull off Route 29, you fill the tank, you buy something inside, and you get back on the road and keep moving. Alexis Murphy was 17 years old, from the even smaller community of Shipman, Virginia, a few miles north of Lovingston on the same Route 29 corridor. She was a popular student, an athlete who played volleyball, and by every account, she was cheerful and outgoing in the specific way of teenagers who are good at sports and know their community well. She had plans for that Saturday evening. She was heading south to Lynchburg, about 35 miles down Route 29, to do some shopping, the kind of weekend errand that is so ordinary it barely registers as a plan. Before she left, she posted on Twitter, "Berg bound." 2 words, a timestamp, an entirely routine announcement of an entirely routine trip. The Liberty gas station in Lovingston was a natural stop on her route south. She pulled in, went inside, moved through the store in the way you do when you're buying something quickly before getting back on the road. The station had surveillance cameras, and those cameras recorded Alexis inside the store. That footage exists. It shows her clearly on August 3rd, 2013, in Lovingston, alive and going about the ordinary business of a Saturday afternoon. It is the last confirmed footage of Alexis Murphy. Here's what the surveillance also captured, and this is where the case turns dark in a specific and documented way. The cameras recorded a camouflage-patterned SUV in the station's lot during the same window. And they recorded, or investigators determined through subsequent work, that Alexis left the station in a direction consistent with following or being followed by that vehicle, heading south on Route 29 toward Lynchburg, the way she always intended to go. Whether she got into that vehicle willingly, was coerced, or left separately, and was intercepted somewhere on the road, that specific sequence of events has not been established with public certainty. What happened next was not discovered for 3 days. On August 6, 2013, 3 days after Alexis posted "Berg bound" and stopped for gas in Lovingston, her white 2003 Nissan Maxima was found in a parking lot outside a movie theater in Albemarle County, roughly 20 miles north of Lovingston, 20 miles in the wrong direction from Lynchburg. Her car had traveled, or been driven, away from her destination and left in a public parking lot where it sat until someone connected it to the missing teenager from Nelson County. She was not with it. There was no note. There was no indication of where she had gone from that parking lot or how the car had gotten there without her. Alexis Murphy had been missing for 3 days before her car surfaced, and her car surfaced 20 miles from where she was last seen on camera, pointing away from where she was going. The search for Alexis Murphy began in earnest once her car was found in that Albemarle County parking lot on August 6, 2013. Law enforcement mobilized quickly. Ground teams, air support, K-9 units working outward from both Lovingston and the movie theater lot where the Maxima had been recovered. The Nelson County Sheriff's Office, the Virginia State Police, and the FBI all became involved in varying degrees as the investigation widened. Flyers went up across the Route 29 corridor within days. Alexis's face was on news broadcasts throughout central Virginia. Her family was vocal and present and persistent in the way that families have to be when the news cycle threatens to move on before the case is resolved. The search generated real attention, real resources, and real investigative momentum in those first weeks. Volunteers joined organized search parties. Community members who knew Alexis, who knew her family, who had seen her face on flyers stapled to telephone poles along the corridor, showed up to walk fields and tree lines in the August heat. And the search produced almost nothing in terms of her physical location. The camouflage SUV from the Liberty Station surveillance became the central investigative thread. Law enforcement worked that footage and the associated vehicle registration data, canvassing the area and cross-referencing what the cameras had captured against known vehicles and known individuals in Nelson County and the surrounding corridor. That work led investigators to a man named Randy Taylor, a 54-year-old resident of the area who owned a camouflage-patterned vehicle consistent with what the surveillance had recorded. Taylor lived not far from the Route 29 corridor, in the rural geography that defines this stretch of Nelson County. He was known in the area in the way that people are known in small communities, not famous, not notorious, simply present. He had a property. He had a camper. He had a vehicle that matched what the cameras showed. Investigators brought him in for questioning and, critically, obtained a warrant to search his property in full. Here is the critical detail from that search. Inside Randy Taylor's camper, forensic technicians recovered DNA evidence connected to Alexis Murphy. The specific nature of that evidence and the full forensic picture it presented were detailed in subsequent court proceedings rather than in initial press releases. But the core fact is documented and was presented at trial. Biological material linking Alexis to the interior of Taylor's camper was recovered during the search of his property. This was not an ambiguous or incidental finding. Combined with the surveillance footage placing his vehicle at the Liberty Station during the same window as Alexis, the timeline of her movements on August 3rd, and the subsequent abandonment of her car in an Albemarle County parking lot 20 miles in the wrong direction, investigators had constructed a case with enough evidentiary weight to move forward. Randy Taylor was arrested and charged with the abduction of Alexis Murphy. The trial took place in 2014. The prosecution laid out the surveillance evidence in detail, the footage from the Liberty Station, the vehicle match, the sequence of events reconstructed from cameras and cell data and witness accounts. They presented the DNA findings from the camper and the broader forensic picture connecting Taylor to Alexis's disappearance. Expert witnesses testified about the evidence. The defense contested the interpretation of the forensic findings and challenged the prosecution's narrative. Maintaining Taylor's innocence throughout the proceedings, the jury heard the full case, deliberated, and returned a verdict. Randy Taylor was found guilty of abduction with intent to defile. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in Virginia State Prison, the maximum available under the charges brought against him. The courtroom, by accounts of those who were present, was a charged and emotional place when the verdict was read. Alexis's family had waited more than a year for that moment. But here is what doesn't make sense when you pull back and look at the full timeline. The conviction came in 2014. 2 life sentences were handed down. The case, from a legal standpoint, was resolved. A perpetrator identified, tried, convicted, sentenced. Randy Taylor was in prison. The legal machinery had done what it was built to do. And yet the most fundamental question in the entire case remained completely, agonizingly unanswered. Where was Alexis Murphy? That answer did not come for 7 more years. 7 years is a specific and almost incomprehensible length of time to sit with an open question of that magnitude. During those 7 years, Taylor sat in prison and did not, in any public accounting, provide information that led investigators directly to Alexis. Investigators are not required to disclose every avenue they pursue in an active search, and it would not be accurate to say that nothing was done. But from the public record, no search effort in those 7 years produced her location. The geography of the Route 29 corridor through Nelson County is heavily wooded and rural enough that systematically covering it is a genuinely enormous task. Terrain that looks manageable on a map reveals itself, on foot, as dense forest, uneven ground, seasonal flooding, and hundreds of acres of land that could swallow physical evidence for years without any single person or organized search effort stumbling across it by chance. The kind of accidental discovery that has resolved other Virginia cases, a farmer walking a field, a hiker on a familiar trail, requires either extraordinary luck or a specific tip pointing searchers to within a reasonable distance of the right location. Neither luck nor a definitive tip materialized for 7 years. The family continued. That is perhaps the simplest and most important thing to say about those 7 years. And it is the thing that deserves the most space in any honest account of this case. Alexis's family, her parents, her grandmother, the people who raised her and knew her and needed to bring her home, continued pushing. They engaged with investigators. They sought any legal or procedural avenue that might compel Taylor or anyone connected to him to provide information about her location. They gave interviews. They kept her name circulating in regional media when the story no longer had the momentum of breaking news behind it. They lived for 7 years in the specific purgatory of having a verdict and not having an answer, knowing legally who was responsible, not knowing physically where she was, which is its own category of ongoing wound that no conviction, however justified, can close. A verdict tells you what happened in the abstract. It does not tell you where to place flowers. On December 3, 2020, search teams working an area near Stagebridge Road, a rural stretch off Route 29 in Nelson County, not far from the corridor where Alexis had last been seen alive, recovered human remains in a wooded area. The location was remote enough that it had not been covered by earlier search efforts with any productive result, which speaks both to the density of the terrain and to the challenge of searching without precise coordinates. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Alexis Murphy. She had been found in the landscape that had held Route 29 secret for 7 years, approximately 17 miles from the Liberty gas station in Lovingston, where she had stopped for gas and walked into a surveillance camera's frame on a Saturday afternoon in August 2013. The recovery brought some measure of resolution, the specific, painful resolution of knowing rather than wondering, which is not comfort exactly, but is something more than nothing, and which anyone who has sat with prolonged uncertainty will recognize as meaningful in its own right. Her family was able to plan a proper burial. Her name could be attached to a complete story rather than an open file with a blank space where the ending should be. The geography of her disappearance, which had been a question mark stretched across miles of rural Virginia highway, finally had a fixed endpoint. But the 7-year gap between conviction and recovery, between the legal resolution of who was responsible and the physical resolution of where she was, asks something serious of anyone paying attention to this case. A man convicted of her abduction, serving 2 life sentences in a Virginia prison, and 7 years pass before she is found in the landscape surrounding the corridor where she was taken. The question of what was said or not said during those years, what was offered or withheld in any cooperation discussions, what investigative resources were applied to the physical search in the intervening time. Those questions exist in the public record as open space rather than answered narrative. We know the beginning and we know the end. The middle is a 7-year silence that a conviction, however warranted, couldn't fill. Now pull back to Route 29 itself, because the corridor deserves to be understood as geography rather than just backdrop. United States Route 29 runs roughly north-south through the Virginia Piedmont, connecting the northern suburbs down through Charlottesville, then south through Nelson County, Lovingston, Amherst, and into Lynchburg before continuing further into the state. Through the rural sections, particularly the stretch between Charlottesville and Lynchburg, the road passes through terrain that is sparsely populated enough that gas stations and small towns function as genuine waypoints, places where travelers stop because the distances between them are long and the alternatives are few. The road is wide and fast and public, where it moves through towns, and then almost immediately isolated once you're a quarter-mile off the main line in any direction. Tree cover is dense year-round. Side roads branch into county territory where addresses can be miles apart and where the kind of ambient visibility that makes public spaces feel safe simply does not exist. This is the corridor where Alexis Murphy was last seen on camera. This is the corridor where her remains were found 7 years later, in a wooded stretch not far from where she was taken. The road kept its secret for a long time. It keeps secrets in the way that rural Virginia highway always has. Not dramatically, not with any obvious menace, but quietly, steadily, in the space between one set of headlights and the next. Alexis Murphy was 17 years old. She played volleyball. She tweeted "Berg bound" on a Saturday afternoon because it was the kind of ordinary thing you post when you're going somewhere unremarkable. She stopped at a gas station on Route 29 and walked across a parking lot and into a surveillance camera's frame. And then she was gone. 7 years later, in a wooded stretch of the same corridor, she came home. A highway shot at dusk, mile markers ticking south through the tree line, the sign for Lovingston. A gas station lot under flat afternoon light, a camera mounted on the exterior wall, recording everything and stopping nothing. Route 29 kept it secret for 7 years. The next case played out block by block on camera, a mile-long, fully documented walk through a lit-up downtown, and still ended in silence. Early morning, September 13th, 2014. Downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, the Downtown Mall, a pedestrian corridor running along East Main Street through the heart of the city, lined with restaurants and bars and shops, streetlights burning overhead, the kind of place that feels safe specifically because it is public and lit and full of people at nearly any hour on a weekend night. The mall is not a dark alley. It is not a remote stretch of highway. It is the social center of a mid-sized university city, the place where people go precisely because other people are there, because being seen is part of the point. On a Friday night bleeding into early Saturday morning in September, when UVA is back in session and the weather is still warm enough to keep people outside, the downtown mall is alive in the particular way of places that exist specifically to hold human activity. It is, by any reasonable measure, one of the last places in Charlottesville where a young woman walking alone should feel unsafe. Hannah Graham was 18 years old, a second-year student at the University of Virginia, British-born, raised partly in the United Kingdom before her family settled in the Northern Virginia area. She was, by the accounts of her professors and fellow students and the people who knew her outside of class, a serious and capable person, a strong academic record, an athlete, someone who had made the transition from high school to university with the kind of purposefulness that suggests she knew what she was there for. She was the kind of student UVA attracts and produces, curious, driven, socially connected without being aimless. She had friends. She had a clear sense of where she was going in the immediate future and beyond it. She was 18 years old and a month into her second year at a school she had chosen deliberately. The evening of September 12th had been social in the ordinary way of a university weekend. Hannah attended a party with friends, the kind of gathering that is completely unremarkable in the context of a college town on a warm September Friday. Apartment, people she knew. The easy looseness of a night with no particular agenda beyond being out and together. At some point late in the evening, she became separated from the group she had arrived with. The circumstances of that separation are not unusual and carry no inherent alarm on their own. Parties shift, people move between rooms and conversations, groups fragment and reform without drama. but separated from her friends and in a part of the city that was not immediately adjacent to her apartment. Hannah was on her own in the early hours of Saturday morning. At 12:56 in the morning on September 13th, she sent a text message to a friend. The message said she was lost. Not frightened, lost. Spatially disoriented in the way that is easy to be at 1 in the morning in a city neighborhood you haven't fully mapped yet. When the streets that look familiar in daylight rearrange themselves slightly in the dark. She was trying to locate herself and get home. It was the kind of text that gets sent and received hundreds of times on weekend nights in college towns without consequence. A minor navigation problem, a moment of disorientation, nothing that requires anything more than a few correct turns. This is where it stops being normal. The downtown mall and its surrounding blocks are covered, at varying intervals and angles, by surveillance cameras attached to businesses, parking structures, and public infrastructure. In the hours after Hannah was reported missing, a report that came in the following afternoon, when it became clear she had not returned to her apartment and could not be reached. Investigators began the work of pulling footage from every available camera along the route she appeared to have taken from the party toward her apartment. What they reconstructed from that footage became one of the most exhaustively documented missing persons timelines in Virginia history. A mile-long sequence of camera captures, each one placing Hannah at a specific location and a specific moment. The images handed off from one frame to the next like a relay, building a picture of exactly where she was and exactly when. Right up until the moment she wasn't anywhere the cameras could see anymore. Here is the critical detail about what that footage showed. Hannah did not walk directly home. She walked away from her apartment, not toward it. From the area of the party, she moved east along the downtown mall, in the opposite direction from the route that would have taken her back to her residence. The footage shows her moving past an Irish pub, then further east, at one point captured by a camera outside a Shell station on the eastern end of the mall area. She was moving fast in some of the clips, not running, but with the particular urgent purposelessness of someone in motion without a clear fixed destination. Someone whose internal navigation is not working cleanly. She looked, in the footage, like a person trying to get somewhere without being certain where that somewhere was. And then the footage shows something else. In images captured in the early morning hours, Hannah appears with a man. His arm is around her. The posture is visible in the surveillance stills. She is moving with him, or he is moving with her. In the specific physical proximity that cameras record but cannot interpret. Whether she knew him, whether she was comfortable with him, whether she was being guided or was being steered. The footage captures the image and cannot supply the meaning behind it. What it establishes is that she was no longer alone, and that she was moving further away from her apartment, further away from the lit center of the mall, and further toward the eastern edge of the area where cameras thinned out and the residential streets opened up into darkness. The last confirmed camera capture of Hannah Graham places her at a specific location on the eastern edge of the downtown area, moving in a direction away from safety, in the company of a man whose face the investigation would work urgently to identify. After that frame, she does not appear on any camera anywhere. A mile of documented movement handed off from lens to lens across the breadth of the city's most surveilled corridor. And then nothing. She walks out of the last frame and the city's eyes go blank. Now here's what doesn't make sense when you hold the full picture together. The downtown mall is not a place that lacks witnesses. On a Friday night in September, the bars and restaurants along East Main don't close early. Staff are present at multiple establishments for hours on either side of the window when Hannah was moving through the area. Rideshare drivers and cab drivers cycle through the corridors repeatedly. Late-night pedestrians, students heading home from parties, people with dogs, The ordinary nighttime population of a university city social center is substantial and varied. Yet, across all of those potential witnesses, across that mile-long documented route that exists on tape and in investigative files, no witness came forward with a real-time account of something alarming. No bartender remembered a concerning interaction. No pedestrian stopped to ask if she needed help. The cameras recorded her disappearance in exquisite detail, and the human environment around her produced essentially nothing useful in the immediate window. She moved through a crowd, and the crowd let her go without knowing it was doing so. The formal search for Hannah Graham was one of the largest in Charlottesville's history, broader even than the search for Morgan Harrington 5 years earlier, mobilizing law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers working in organized grids across the city and surrounding areas. Tip lines received substantial volume. The investigation generated national media coverage within days and sustained it for weeks. UVA's campus and the surrounding neighborhoods were searched systematically. The manhunt produced, within 2 weeks, a suspect, Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., the same man whose DNA had been connected to Morgan Harrington's case and whose background, when investigators pulled it fully, revealed a history that the public had no reason to know about before Hannah Graham's name was on every screen in the country. Matthew was arrested in Galveston, Texas, on September 24, 2014, 11 days after Hannah disappeared, while apparently attempting to leave the country by boat. He was extradited to Virginia and charged. On October 18, 2014, 5 weeks and 5 days after Hannah Graham was last seen on a downtown Charlottesville surveillance camera, human remains were discovered on an abandoned farm property off Old Lynchburg Road in southern Albemarle County, roughly 8 miles from the downtown mall. The location was rural and overgrown, the kind of property that requires specific knowledge or deliberate navigation to reach in the dark. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains were Hannah Graham's. She had been brought there on or very close to the night she disappeared. The farm was not a place someone stumbles upon. It was a destination. Jesse Matthew was subsequently convicted of the first-degree murder of Hannah Graham. He had already been connected through DNA evidence to the murder of Morgan Harrington, and forensic threads established during the investigation linked him to other cases as well. He is serving multiple life sentences in Virginia State Prison. The connection between his cases, Morgan Harrington in 2009, Hannah Graham in 2014, painted a picture of a predator operating in and around Charlottesville over a period of years, exploiting the specific vulnerability of young women who were temporarily disoriented and alone in familiar-feeling public spaces. But here is what the cameras, for all their patience and their detail, could not provide. They could record the route. They could timestamp the progression. They could establish, with a precision that no human witness matched, exactly where Hannah was at every point along that mile-long walk. What they could not do, what surveillance, for all its apparent omniscience, has never been able to do, is intervene. The footage exists because the cameras were there, recording faithfully in the dark. Hannah walked through their field of view, was handed from frame to frame across the breadth of the most documented corridor in the city, and still disappeared. The cameras watched the whole thing happen and couldn't stop any of it. That gap between seeing and saving, between documentation and protection, is the specific and permanent horror at the center of this case. A freeze frame on a lit storefront, a figure moving past the edge of the shot, the timestamp ticking forward. The next camera, a block east, showing only an empty sidewalk under a streetlight. Hit subscribe if you want to keep going deeper on cases like this. there's a lot more road ahead. The next one got lost on a trip she had taken 100 times, and the thing that came back wasn't her. December 5th, 2015. A Saturday morning in Northern Virginia. The kind of winter day that is cold and flat and unremarkable in every way. Gray sky, bare trees, the ordinary machinery of a weekend morning running on schedule. Somewhere in the suburban geography connecting Spotsylvania County to the Washington metropolitan area, a 19-year-old woman named Caitlin Michelle Akins was supposed to be making her way to Reagan National Airport. She had a flight to catch. She was going home to Arizona, back to her fiancé, back to the life she had been building west of the state line. The trip from Spotsylvania to Reagan National is a route that runs through some of the most heavily trafficked suburban corridor in Virginia. Down Interstate 95, up through the Beltway interchange, into the airport complex that sits just across the Potomac from Washington. It is not a complicated journey. It is the kind of trip that people in the Northern Virginia and DC metro area make regularly enough that it becomes automatic. A highway, a few exits, a terminal, a gate. Routine infrastructure for a routine trip on a routine Saturday morning in early December. Caitlin had grown up in Spotsylvania County. She knew the area the way you know a place you were raised in, not just the main roads, but the back ones, the shortcuts, the geography that becomes part of your internal map before you're old enough to drive it yourself. She had left Virginia sometime before December 2015 and relocated to Arizona, where she was engaged and building a life with someone who was expecting her home that weekend. But the ties to Spotsylvania were still active and present. The kind of roots that don't fully lift just because you relocate, that keep pulling you back for visits and holidays, and the particular gravitational force of the people and places that made you. She had been back in the area for some period before December 5th, staying in the Partlow area of Spotsylvania County, a rural community in the western part of the county, away from the more developed corridors closer to Fredericksburg. And the plan for that Saturday was clear and finite. Get to Reagan National and fly back to Arizona. A trip with a fixed beginning in Spotsylvania, a fixed midpoint at the airport, and a fixed end on the other side of the country where someone was waiting at arrivals. Her stepfather, James Branton, would later tell investigators that he drove Caitlin to the Springfield town center area on the morning of December 5th. Springfield is a substantial suburban hub in Fairfax County, situated roughly 40 miles north of Spotsylvania at the junction of several major commuter arteries. Interstate 95, the Fairfax County Parkway, and the Capitol Beltway all converge in that general geography. Critically, the Springfield-Franconia metro station sits there, served by the Blue Line, which runs directly and without transfer to Reagan National Airport. If you are driving someone to the airport from Spotsylvania and you want to spare them the full highway push into the airport complex, particularly on a Saturday morning when Beltway traffic can be unpredictable, dropping them at a metro station with a direct airport connection is a completely logical and practical choice. 40 minutes on the Blue Line and you're at the terminal. Branton said he left her there. He said she was fine. He said the last he saw of her, she was oriented toward the metro or otherwise making her way toward the airport from the Springfield drop-off point. This is where it stops being normal. Caitlin never checked in for her flight. The airline has no record of her passing through security screening, no boarding scan at the gate, no interaction with airline staff at the terminal. Nothing that places her inside Reagan National Airport at any point on December 5th, 2015. Her fiancé in Arizona, who had been expecting her to walk through an arrivals door that afternoon, received no flight, no call explaining a delay, no text saying she'd missed her connection, nothing. Whatever route Caitlin was supposed to take from the Springfield drop-off point to the terminal at Reagan National, she did not complete it. At some point between James Branton's account of leaving her in Springfield and the gate where her plane departed without her, Caitlin Akins disappeared from the record entirely. Her family raised the alarm when she failed to arrive. The concern escalated quickly from worry into something more serious when it became clear she was completely unreachable. Not by phone, not through any of the digital channels that make a person findable in 2015. Her bank accounts went silent. There was no activity on her debit or credit cards after that morning. No ATM withdrawal, no gas station swipe, no grocery purchase, no online transaction of any kind that would place her body in a specific location after the morning of December 5th. Her social media went dark in the same window. No posts, no check-ins, no messages sent or received through any platform her family and friends could monitor. The specific and simultaneous combination of those absences, no flight, no phone contact, no bank activity, no social media presence, assembled quickly into a picture that ruled out the most reassuring explanations available. People who voluntarily walk away from their lives, who choose to disappear into a new situation somewhere, still use ATMs. They still make calls to someone, even if not to the people looking for them. They still, in 2015, leave digital traces in the ordinary course of surviving day to day. Caitlin left none of those traces. The silence was total and immediate and covered every channel at once. Here's the critical detail, and it is the kind of detail that shifts this case from troubling to something colder and more deliberate. 2 days after Caitlin was supposed to board her flight, on December 7th, 2015, a piece of blue luggage was found discarded in a roadside ditch in Spotsylvania County. The location was River Road, a rural stretch running through the western part of the county, the same general geography where Caitlin had been staying in the days before her departure. Inside the luggage, investigators found a wallet. Inside the wallet was Caitlin Akins' Arizona identification card, the ID she would have needed at the airport gate, the document that ties a person's face to their ticket and their seat on a plane, the luggage she had packed for a flight to Arizona, the bag that should have been checked at Reagan National or carried through security and loaded into an overhead bin somewhere over the Midwest. That bag was in a drainage ditch in Spotsylvania County, roughly 40 to 50 miles from the airport. Back in the county she had started from that morning, pointed in exactly the wrong direction. Now, hold that geography carefully, because it is doing something very specific. Caitlin's stepfather said he drove her north to Springfield toward the airport. Her luggage turned up south of Springfield in Spotsylvania, in the direction she had come from rather than the direction she was going. The bag traveled the wrong way. Consider the possibilities that fact opens up. Either Caitlin returned to Spotsylvania after the Springfield drop-off, voluntarily or under compulsion, or her luggage was separated from her before she ever reached Springfield, and the drop-off did not occur the way it was described, or something happened during the transit itself that redirected both her and her belongings before she ever got close to an airport terminal. None of those possibilities leads to a benign explanation. All of them point toward a sequence of events on the morning of December 5th that was not a missed connection or a changed plan, or a young woman deciding at the last minute to go somewhere else. The luggage in the ditch is physical evidence of something going wrong, something that required the bag to end up 40 miles from where it was supposed to be without its owner. The investigation drew in the FBI, alongside Virginia State Police and local Spotsylvania County law enforcement. The cross-jurisdictional nature of the case, a disappearance that potentially involved Spotsylvania County, Fairfax County, and an international airport, warranted federal involvement, and the Bureau joined the investigation relatively early. Investigators interviewed James Branton and worked to reconstruct Caitlin's movements on December 5th through whatever surveillance footage, cell tower data, and witness accounts were available along the corridor between Partlow and Springfield. The specific findings of that reconstruction have not been fully disclosed in the public record, which is consistent with an active, ongoing investigation, but is also, for anyone following the case through publicly available sources, a sustained and significant gap. No confirmed surveillance footage placing Caitlin at the Springfield metro station or anywhere along the airport route on December 5th has been released. No cell tower data establishing her phone's location in transit that morning has entered the public record in any confirmed form. The account James Branton gave investigators that he dropped her in Springfield and she was fine remains the only detailed narrative of her movements that morning, and it has not been publicly corroborated by independent physical evidence. James Branton's name has been a consistent and prominent presence in the public reporting surrounding this case from very early in the investigation. He was the last person to claim to have seen Caitlin alive, and his account is the foundation of every reconstruction of her movements on December 5th. Investigators examined him closely and repeatedly, and that scrutiny is clearly reflected across the years of reporting. It is essential to be precise about where that scrutiny has led in the legal record. James Branton has not been charged in connection with Caitlin Aikens' disappearance. He has not been arrested for anything directly related to her case. No public charging document has named him in connection with what happened to her on the morning of December 5th, 2015. What is documented is this. In 2026, James Branton was arrested on sex-related offenses. Reporting on that arrest indicated that Caitlin Aikens was named as a victim in connection with those charges. The precise legal framing of the charges and the specific relationship between that arrest and the long-running investigation into Caitlin's disappearance has not been fully detailed in the available public record. What can be said with certainty is that the 2026 arrest did not resolve the central question of what happened to Caitlin on December 5th, 2015, and that her disappearance remains officially open and unresolved. The investigation continues across multiple agencies and has not produced a public conclusion about where she is or what happened after she left Partlow that morning. What the case leaves behind, when you stand back from the details and look at the shape of it, is a specific and geometrically strange picture. A woman packed a bag and was driven north toward an airport. The bag came back south and ended up in a drainage ditch in the county she had started from. Her identification, the document that proves you are who you say you are, that gets you through the gate and onto the plane and home, was inside that bag, sitting in a ditch on River Road instead of in a security tray at Reagan National. And Caitlin Aikens has not been found. No confirmed trace of her exists in any public record after the morning of December 5th. No camera, no transaction, no cell ping, no credible sighting. The FBI has been involved for years. Multiple agencies have worked the case across a sustained period. And the gap between a suburban drop-off in Springfield and a ditched suitcase in Spotsylvania has never been publicly filled by any confirmed account of what actually happened in between. Think about what it means to pack a suitcase for a trip home. You fold the things you need. Think about the weather on the other end. Make the small calculations of someone planning to arrive somewhere and stay a while. You put your ID in your wallet because you will absolutely need it at the gate. You zip the bag closed and carry it to the car because you are going somewhere specific, because the flight is booked, because someone on the other side of the country is already thinking about picking you up from the airport. The bag is a physical argument for continuity. Proof in the form of folded clothes and a travel document that you intended to land somewhere and keep going. Her bag landed in a ditch on River Road in Spotsylvania County. Her flight took off without her. An airport gate that opened and closed for every other passenger on that manifest, except the one person whose name was printed on a ticket that nobody ever scanned. She was heading away from Spotsylvania, and her luggage came back. Now we go back 3 decades to a road where the cars kept coming back empty again and again, until law enforcement could no longer call it coincidence. Before we get to the specific cases on the Colonial Parkway, you need to understand what the Parkway is. Not as a road, but as a geography. Because the Colonial Parkway is not a normal highway, and that distinction matters enormously to what happened there. The Colonial Parkway is a 23-mile scenic roadway managed by the National Park Service, running through Colonial National Historical Park in the Virginia Tidewater region. It connects 3 sites of major historical significance: Jamestown on the James River to the west, Colonial Williamsburg in the middle, and Yorktown on the York River to the east. The road was built deliberately to feel removed from ordinary highway infrastructure. No commercial development along its margins, no gas stations or fast food signs interrupting the tree line, no traffic signals or exit ramps connecting it to the suburban grid at regular intervals. Its access points are limited and specific. Its shoulders are narrow. Its tree cover is dense and continuous in the sections away from the water overlooks, closing in on both sides of the pavement in a way that muffles ambient sound and light from the surrounding region. It was designed in the 1930s and 40s to create the experience of moving through preserved historical landscape rather than functional modern infrastructure. The engineers and planners who built it succeeded completely. The Parkway is genuinely beautiful in the way that deliberate landscape design, given enough decades to mature, eventually becomes indistinguishable from nature itself. But that beauty has a specific structural consequence that investigators and park rangers understood very well by the late 1980s. The Parkway's limited access points mean that the number of entry and exit locations for any vehicle is small and predictable, which should, in theory, make it easier to monitor. But the dense tree cover on either side of the road, combined with the limited sight lines at the various pull-offs and overlooks, means that a vehicle parked at one of those stopping points is effectively invisible from the moving roadway unless a passing driver specifically slows down and looks for it. The overlooks and pull-offs were designed to give visitors a place to stop and absorb the river views or the historical landscape in peace, away from the noise of ordinary traffic. They became, in the darkness, away from tourist hours, something else entirely. Pockets of genuine isolation embedded in a road that appeared, from any map or any daylight drive, to be a fully public throughway running between 3 major visitor destinations. The Parkway looks connected. On a summer afternoon with families parked at the overlooks and cyclists moving along the shoulder, it feels completely safe. After dark, in the seasons outside the tourist peak, sections of it are among the most effectively isolated stretches of road in the entire Tidewater region. The same design choices that made it peaceful made it dangerous in ways its architects never intended. This is the road where people kept dying and disappearing, and the cases kept not connecting clearly enough until the pattern became too consistent to ignore. The Colonial Parkway killings, referred to collectively under that name by investigators, journalists, and the broader public record, involved at least 8 victims across a period stretching from 1986 to 1989. The cases share enough structural similarities that investigators from multiple agencies eventually concluded they were almost certainly connected. Couples targeted in vehicles on or near the Parkway, attacks that left minimal forensic evidence recoverable from the scenes. A perpetrator or perpetrators who appeared to understand the road's geography with the familiarity of someone who had spent significant time there across different seasons and different conditions, and a specific absence of witnesses despite the Parkway's nominal status as a public road open to any driver with reason to be on it. The cases remained unsolved for decades. The FBI maintained an active investigation, Virginia State Police worked the files. Cold case units returned to the evidence at intervals across 30 years, applying new forensic techniques to old physical material, looking for threads that had been invisible to earlier technology. And for most of that time, the Parkway's secrets stayed exactly where they were, buried in the specific darkness that the Park Service had, with the best of intentions, so carefully cultivated along 23 miles of Tidewater, Virginia. October 1986. Kathleen Thomas was 27 years old, a recent graduate of the United States Naval Academy, the first in her family to attend a service academy, a woman who had navigated one of the most demanding academic and physical institutions in the country and come out the other side with a commission and a career. Annapolis does not graduate people who aren't capable of managing difficulty and pressure with composure. That is perhaps the most fundamental thing the Academy selects for. Kathy Thomas had done that, had earned her commission, and was stationed in the Tidewater region after graduation, building her post-academy career with the focused seriousness that the institution instills. She was 27 years old and at the beginning of something. Rebecca Ann Dowski was 21 years old, a student at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, one of the oldest universities in the country, located in the geographic center of the Parkway's corridor, the kind of institution whose students and faculty move through the surrounding Tidewater landscape with the ease of people who belong there. Becky Dowski was working toward her degree with the ordinary purposefulness of a 21-year-old who has things ahead of her. The two women were friends, and the nature and depth of their relationship has been discussed thoughtfully in reporting and advocacy surrounding the case over the decades. The relevant fact for the investigative record being that they were together on the evening of October 9th, 1986, and that they were in Kathy Thomas's car, somewhere on or near the Colonial Parkway, as that evening moved into night. What happened to them was not discovered immediately. Their bodies were found on October 12, 1986, 3 days after they were last known to be together. The car, Kathy Thomas's Honda, was found on a section of the Parkway near Yorktown, positioned down an embankment in a way that placed it below the sight line of passing traffic. This is a specific and important detail about the scene, and it deserves to be held carefully. The car was not visible from the road in the ordinary course of driving past at normal speed. A driver moving along the Parkway in the direction of that section would not see it without specifically slowing and looking toward the embankment. Someone who knew that particular stretch of road well enough to identify it as a location where a vehicle could be staged below the road's sight line, where it would sit undiscovered not for minutes, but for days. That level of specificity suggests familiarity with the Parkway's terrain at a depth well beyond casual tourist knowledge. This was not a random pull-off. It was a selected location. The car had been placed there deliberately by someone who understood what the embankment would and would not reveal to passing traffic. Here's the critical detail about what investigators found at the scene. And it is a detail that appears in both the original reporting and in every serious subsequent revisitation of the case across decades of coverage. The vehicle had been doused with diesel fuel. An attempt had been made to set it alight, to destroy the car and its contents, to burn away the forensic landscape of what had happened there, to reduce the scene to ash and metal and render investigators' work impossible before it began. This was not impulsive. Bringing an accelerant to a scene and using it on a vehicle is a premeditated act. It requires planning. It requires materials. It requires a specific intention to obliterate rather than simply flee. The attempt failed. The fire did not fully take hold or was interrupted or extinguished before it consumed the evidence the car contained. The vehicle and its contents survived in a damaged but substantially intact state. which meant that the scene, while compromised by the attempted destruction, still held physical information for investigators to work with. The failure of that arson attempt is one of the most consequential facts in the entire Colonial Parkway series. Someone had planned for this scene to disappear completely, had taken deliberate steps toward making it disappear, and it didn't. The deaths of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski were ruled homicides. The manner of death and the specific forensic details from the medical examiner's findings have been discussed across decades of reporting. But the core investigative picture is this: they were attacked. They did not survive that attack, and their bodies were left in the vehicle that was then staged at a concealed location on the Parkway's embankment and subjected to a failed arson attempt. The Parkway had produced its first confirmed victims in what would eventually be understood as a connected series spanning 3 years. The investigation in the immediate aftermath was substantial. The National Park Service, the FBI, and Virginia State Police all became involved. Jurisdictional complexity being one of the persistent structural features of Parkway cases, since the road runs through federal land managed by the Park Service, which creates a specific legal geography for any crime committed on or immediately adjacent to it. Multiple agencies meant multiple chains of command, multiple evidence protocols, and the particular investigative friction that interagency work across federal and state jurisdictions has always generated. Investigators worked the forensic evidence from the scene, interviewed people connected to both victims' lives and movements, and attempted to reconstruct the events of October 9th from whatever physical and testimonial record the scene and the community had preserved. The investigation did not produce an arrest. It did not produce a named perpetrator in the immediate term, or in the medium term that followed across the next several years, or in the long term that extended across the following 3.5 decades. What it produced instead was an open file, meticulous, carefully maintained, returned to repeatedly, that stayed open while the Parkway quietly accumulated more cases. Now here is where the case entered a new and partial phase of resolution. In 2024, reporting emerged connecting a since-deceased man named Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. to multiple deaths associated with the Colonial Parkway series. Wilmer had worked as a commercial fisherman in the Tidewater region. Someone who knew the local waterways, the seasonal rhythms of the area, and the geography of the Parkway corridor, with the granular familiarity of a person who had spent years operating in that specific landscape. He had died before investigators publicly named him, which means the accountability that a living trial would have provided. The cross-examination, the verdict, the sentencing, the public record of guilt established in a courtroom is not available to the families of the victims. The FBI's investigation identified Wilmer, according to reporting on the 2024 development, in connection with at least 3 of the deaths associated with the Parkway series. The specific evidentiary basis for that connection has not been fully disclosed publicly. What can be said is that the investigation moved, that a name has been attached to the cases in a way it was not for 38 years, and that the families now have something different than they had before. Not a trial, not a living person held accountable, but a name and an investigative determination that the name belongs to what happened on that road. For Kathleen Thomas's family and Rebecca Dowski's family, that 2024 development arrived after nearly 4 decades of wading through a silence the Parkway had shown no intention of breaking on its own. The embankment near Yorktown, where a Honda sat below the road sightline in October 1986, looks, to any driver passing today, like every other section of the same carefully maintained road. The trees have grown fuller in 38 years. The Parkway is still beautiful. The overlooks still frame the same river views. And the specific pocket of darkness between the road and the embankment, the one that held a car and its occupants for 3 days before anyone looked directly at it, still exists, exactly as it was designed to, as a quiet fold in the landscape that gives nothing away unless you already know where to look. This was only the beginning. 2 years later, the parkway swallowed a couple on their very first date and gave back everything except the people. April 10th, 1988. A Sunday evening in Newport News, Virginia, a city on the Virginia Peninsula sitting between the James River to the south and the York River to the north. A working waterfront community with a substantial military and shipyard presence, and the particular social geography of a place where people have lived and worked in close proximity for generations. Newport News is not a transient city in the way that some port communities become transient. It has roots, neighborhoods, schools, the kind of institutional continuity that produces people who know each other across multiple contexts and multiple years. Christopher Newport College, now Christopher Newport University, sits in the city's residential fabric, a mid-sized institution producing the kind of student body that stays connected to the local community, rather than existing in a separate campus bubble. In April 1988, 2 Christopher Newport students named Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Lee Haley were getting ready to spend an evening together for the first time. Richard Keith Call was 20 years old. Cassandra Haley, Cassie to the people who knew her, was 18. They were acquaintances in the overlapping social world of Christopher Newport's student body, the kind of people who had likely crossed paths enough times to know each other's names and faces without yet knowing each other properly. April 10th, 1988 was their first date. There is something in that specific fact that deserves to sit for a moment before the rest of the story moves forward, because first dates carry a particular kind of charged ordinariness. The particular mix of anticipation and mild nervousness and the low-level performance of a good version of yourself that makes them memorable in a specific way that later dates rarely replicate. A first date is a beginning. It is, by definition, premised on the existence of a future. A second date, a third, or at minimum, the conversation you'll have afterward with friends about whether it went well. It is the most forward-looking social event in the ordinary calendar of a 20-year-old's life. Richard Call and Cassie Haley were at the beginning of something on the evening of April 10th, 1988. That is what makes the specific geography of where they ended up that night so permanently difficult to absorb. The evening started with a party in Newport News. The kind of social gathering that is unremarkable in the context of college-age life in any city, in any era. A collection of people who know each other to varying degrees, music and conversation, and the easy looseness of a weekend night. The couple spent time at the party together, doing what people do on a first date when the setting is social and other people are present. Navigating the balance between the private conversation of 2 people getting to know each other and the public context of a room full of acquaintances. At some point in the later hours of the evening, they left. Where they were heading, or whether they had a specific destination in mind, has not been established with certainty in the public record. What investigators were able to determine is that Richard Call's car ended up on the Colonial Parkway, specifically at the York River overlook, a pull-off on the parkway's eastern section that faces north toward the York River and the broad tidewater water view that the parkway's designers had, decades earlier, specifically preserved for visitors to stop and take in. This is where it stops being normal. The York River overlook is approximately 2 miles from the location on the parkway near Yorktown, where Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski had been found 18 months earlier in October 1986. 2 miles along the same road, the same limited access parkway with the same dense tree cover and the same structural isolation embedded in its carefully maintained landscape. Richard Call's car was found the following morning, April 11th, 1988, by Richard's own father, who was driving to work along the parkway and recognized his son's vehicle parked at the overlook's shoulder. That specific detail carries its own particular weight. A father driving a familiar road on an ordinary Monday morning, registering something that shouldn't be there, pulling over to look at his son's car sitting at a river overlook in the early morning light, and beginning to understand that the morning was not going to be ordinary at all. Here's the critical detail about what Richard Call's father found when he stopped. The car was there. The keys were in the ignition. That is not the inventory of an abandoned vehicle. A car doesn't get left with keys in the ignition by someone who plans to walk somewhere and not come back for it. Keys in the ignition is the specific signature of a departure that wasn't planned. A moment so abrupt and so immediately consuming that the ordinary sequence of turning off the car and pocketing the keys, an action so habitual it requires no conscious thought, was interrupted before it could complete. Beyond the keys, investigators found the personal belongings that Richard and Cassie had with them that evening. Richard's wallet, containing his identification and whatever cash he was carrying, sat inside the car. Cassie's purse was there. Their clothing, items of clothing belonging to both of them, was found inside the vehicle. Now sit with that inventory for a moment, because it is the most disorienting set of facts in the entire case. A wallet, a purse, clothing, keys in the ignition. The car itself intact and untouched in any way that suggested a mechanical failure or a collision or any of the ordinary explanations for why a vehicle ends up stopped on a road shoulder. Nothing was taken that a robbery would explain. The wallet was there, the purse was there, the valuables were present and undisturbed. Whatever happened at the York River overlook on the night of April 10th, 1988, it did not involve anyone taking anything from the car. The car was not the target. The people were. But here is what doesn't make sense, and what separates this case from the Thomas and Dowski case in a way that has haunted investigators and the families of both victims for more than 3 decades. Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski were found. Their bodies were recovered from the scene, from inside the vehicle on the embankment near Yorktown, and their families had the specific and painful resolution of knowing their daughter's physical location, of having remains to bury, and a fixed geographic endpoint to the story. Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Haley were not found. Despite the car, despite the clothing and wallet and purse, despite the overlook's proximity to water in multiple directions and the decades of organized search efforts that have moved through the Parkway corridor and the surrounding York River geography, neither of them has ever been physically recovered. Their bodies have never been found. In all of the vast literature of the Colonial Parkway investigation, the FBI files, the Virginia State Police records, the journalism that has covered the cases across 35 years, Richard Call and Cassie Haley remain, in the most literal and concrete sense, missing. The absence of remains is an investigative and human problem of a specific kind. When a body is recovered, forensic analysis can establish time and manner of death with a precision that informs the investigation in concrete ways. It tells you something about what happened, about how, about what evidence the scene may have preserved or destroyed. When there is no body, that entire forensic layer is simply absent. You have a car, you have belongings, you have a timeline that ends at a river overlook on a dark April night, and you have 2 people who were there and then were not, without the physical record that recovery provides. The York River is tidal in this section, influenced by the pull of the Chesapeake Bay to the east, moving water in and out of the broader estuary system, with a complexity that makes underwater search genuinely difficult, and recovery uncertain even when general location is established. The river took, and in this case, kept, The investigation placed this case firmly within the Colonial Parkway series based on the structural similarities to the Thomas and Doused case and to the subsequent cases that followed in 1988 and 1989. The limited access road, the targeted couple, the parkway overlook location, the forensic minimalism at the scene, all of it was consistent with a perpetrator or perpetrators who had done this before and who understood, specifically and practically, what the parkway's geography would and would not reveal. The prevailing investigative theory, and it is important to frame this precisely as theory, because no perpetrator has been tried and convicted specifically in connection with this case, is that whoever was responsible approached Richard Call's vehicle at the overlook, possibly presenting themselves in a way that gave the couple an initial reason not to be alarmed. The specific theory that law enforcement has discussed in multiple public statements and investigative profiles over the years is that the perpetrator may have posed as law enforcement. A scenario that would explain both why the couple might have initially rolled down a window or opened a door without resistance, and why the scene ultimately reflected such a complete and sudden absence of both people, as though they had been removed from the vehicle in a controlled rather than a chaotic way. This theory is not confirmed. It has not been established in a courtroom. It is the investigative reasoning that best accounts for the specific physical evidence at the scene. The car with valuables intact, keys in the ignition, no signs of a struggle violent enough to leave obvious physical evidence on the vehicle's exterior. But it remains, in the legal and evidentiary sense, a leading theory rather than a proven account. The 2024 reporting connecting Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. to multiple Colonial Parkway deaths is relevant here in the same way it was relevant to the Thomas and Doused case. Wilmer has been named in connection with the Parkway series by investigators, and the Call and Haley case falls within the series' documented scope. The specific evidentiary basis for Wilmer's connection to each individual case within the series has not been fully publicly detailed. Wilmer died before the public naming, which removes any possibility of trial and the accountability structure that a living prosecution would have provided. What remains is the name, attached to the series, arriving 36 years after the car was found at the York River overlook, with keys in the ignition and 2 people gone. Richard Call's father drove to work that morning on a road he knew. He saw his son's car at a pull-off facing the river, and he stopped. The morning sun was on the York River. The car doors were closed. The keys were inside. And nowhere on the overlook, nowhere along the parkway shoulder in either direction, nowhere in the immediate geography of water and tree line and early April light, was any sign of where his son and the girl his son had taken on a first date had gone. The car sat there, intact and organized and terrifyingly normal-looking, containing everything a robbery would have taken and nothing that explained the absence of the 2 people it had carried to that spot the night before. A first date, a river view in the dark, a car on a shoulder with the keys still in it, waiting for someone to come back and turn the engine over. Nobody came. On land, the parkway hid its victims in the dark between the trees and the water. The next woman vanished where there was nowhere to hide at all, out on the open ocean, with an entire ship full of people and nowhere to go. March 24th, 1998. Somewhere on the Caribbean Sea, aboard the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas, en route from San Juan, Puerto Rico, toward the island of Curaçao in the Netherlands Antilles. The ship is a substantial vessel, nearly 800 feet long, carrying hundreds of passengers and crew across open water on a route that passes through some of the most traveled vacation geography in the Western Hemisphere. A cruise ship is, in terms of its fundamental architecture, the opposite of the isolated pull-offs and rural highways that have defined most of the cases in this video. It is a closed system with defined boundaries. Every passenger has a cabin. Every cabin has a registered occupant. Every door that leads off the ship leads to the ocean. There is no slipping away into a surrounding neighborhood. No tree line to disappear into. No network of county roads branching off into terrain that takes years to search. A cruise ship should be, by its physical logic, one of the hardest places in the world to disappear from without explanation. That is what makes what happened aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas on March 24, 1998, so enduringly strange. Not just as a mystery, but as a structural impossibility that the facts of the case have never satisfactorily resolved. Amy Lynn Bradley was 23 years old. She had grown up in Petersburg, Virginia, a city with deep historical roots sitting roughly 25 miles south of Richmond on Interstate 95. A community with the particular character of a mid-sized Virginia city that has been through several distinct economic and demographic chapters across its history. Amy had attended Longwood University in Farmville, about 60 miles west of Petersburg, graduating with a degree and moving forward into early adult life with the momentum of someone who knew where she was headed. She worked as a lifeguard and coach. She was athletic and outgoing and socially comfortable in the way of people who have spent years in water-based sports environments, pools and outdoor facilities, and the easy camaraderie of coaching work. She was the kind of person who connected with others readily and who, by the accounts of her family and friends, was genuinely fun to be around in the specific way that people with natural physical confidence and social ease tend to be. The vacation was a family trip. Amy was traveling aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas with her parents, Ron and Iva Bradley, and her brother Brad, a family unit on a Caribbean cruise. The kind of trip that is, by design and by the logic of the vacation industry that structures it, supposed to be entirely safe and entirely pleasant. The ship had departed from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and was making its way toward Curacao. The evening of March 23rd had been social in the way that cruise evenings tend to be. The ship's entertainment facilities, bars, and common spaces drew passengers together in the loose, holiday-amplified sociability that cruise culture deliberately cultivates. Amy spent part of the evening with members of a reggae band called Ichiban that was performing aboard the ship, an interaction that was visible to other passengers and that later became significant to the investigation. She returned to the cabin she shared with her brother Brad in the early hours of March 24th, with the ship's keycard system logging her entry to the cabin at approximately 3:40 in the morning. This is where the timeline becomes critical, and every minute in the following window matters in ways that could not have been apparent to anyone involved at the time. At approximately 5:30 in the morning, Amy's father Ron got up, early riser, the kind of man who is awake before the rest of the ship has stirred, and went out to the cabin's balcony. Amy was there. She was asleep or resting on a deck chair on the balcony, in the particular unconscious ease of someone who had come back from a social evening and settled into the open air rather than the cabin interior. Ron saw her, registered that she was there, and went back inside. He did not wake her. There was no reason to wake her. She was safe. She was on the balcony of a cabin on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean, and the morning was early enough that letting her sleep was the obvious and generous choice. He went back to whatever he was doing inside the cabin. Approximately 30 minutes passed. At approximately 6 in the morning, half an hour after Ron Bradley had seen his daughter asleep on the balcony deck chair, someone in the family checked the balcony again. Amy was gone. The deck chair was empty. The balcony railing was there, facing open ocean. The door between the balcony and the cabin interior was accessible. And Amy Bradley, who had been asleep or resting on that chair 30 minutes earlier in the pre-dawn dark of the Caribbean, was simply not there anymore. Here's the critical detail about what followed in the immediate minutes after that discovery. The Bradley family did not wait. They went directly to the ship's security staff and reported Amy missing immediately, without the delay that characterizes so many disappearance reports, where families and friends spend hours assuming the missing person has simply gone somewhere they haven't thought to look yet. Ron Bradley had seen Amy on that balcony at 5:30 in the morning. At 6 in the morning, she was gone. The family knew, in the way that families sometimes know before knowledge has any logical basis, that this was not Amy getting up early and going to get coffee. They raised the alarm. Ship security initiated a search of the vessel. Cabins, common areas, decks, all of the spaces that make up the rhapsody of the sea's 800 feet of floating architecture. The search was thorough. It was conducted by people who knew the ship's layout with the professional familiarity of staff who have worked every corridor and every deck. Amy Bradley was not found anywhere on the ship. The Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard was notified and launched a search of the waters along the ship's route. A 4-day operation covering the sea lanes the Rhapsody had transited in the hours around Amy's disappearance. The search found no physical evidence. No body, no clothing, no personal effects floating in the water, no debris that could be connected to Amy or to the circumstances of her disappearance. 4 days of active maritime search across a section of the Caribbean produced nothing recoverable. Now here is what doesn't make sense, and what has driven the investigation and the public attention around this case for more than 2 decades. The two most immediately available explanations for a person disappearing from a cruise ship balcony, that they went overboard, accidentally or by choice, and that the sea took them, are the explanations that the physical evidence most consistently fails to support. Amy Bradley was athletic, coordinated, and comfortable around water in a way that speaks to years of professional and recreational aquatic experience. The balcony railing configuration on the Rhapsody of the Seas was not something a person with her physical capability would accidentally fall over under ordinary circumstances, though the maritime investigation examined this possibility seriously. The theory of a voluntary departure from the ship, the deliberately vague language that investigators and journalists reach for when they mean suicide, was examined against everything known about Amy's state of mind, her plans, her demeanor that evening, the family context of the trip, and the specific logged return to her cabin at 3:40 in the morning that suggested she had come back for the night with every intention of continuing the trip. Nothing in the available record supports the voluntary departure theory with any evidentiary weight. It is a possibility that the absence of contrary evidence makes impossible to fully rule out. But it is not a possibility that the affirmative evidence supports. What the affirmative evidence does is more complicated and more troubling. Multiple witnesses aboard the ship reported interactions with Amy that evening and into the early morning. Most significantly, the members of the Ichiban Reggae Band, whose connection to Amy during the ship's evening entertainment has been documented extensively across the investigation's public record. The nature and extent of those interactions, and whether any of them have investigative significance beyond establishing Amy's social movements during the hours before her disappearance, has been the subject of ongoing investigative attention and public speculation for years. It would not be accurate or fair to characterize any specific individual connected to those interactions as responsible for Amy's disappearance, without a legal basis for doing so. And no such legal basis exists in the public record. What can be said is that investigators have revisited those witness accounts and those documented interactions repeatedly across the years. The case produced a series of reported sightings in the years following Amy's disappearance, reported encounters in various locations including Curaçao itself, Barbados, and other Caribbean destinations, in which witnesses claimed to have seen a woman matching Amy's description in circumstances that suggested she might be alive and in some form of captivity or restricted movement. These reported sightings are documented across the case's public record and were taken seriously enough by law enforcement to be investigated. They must also be understood as unconfirmed. None of them produced a verified identification of Amy Bradley or resulted in any investigative conclusion that she was alive in a specific location. Reported sightings in missing persons cases, particularly high-profile cases that generate sustained media coverage, carry an inherent evidentiary problem. The combination of a widely circulated photograph, a missing person's description entering public consciousness, and the genuine human desire to help produces reports that must all be investigated, while also being filtered against the noise that genuine public engagement generates. The reported sightings from Amy Bradley's case have been investigated. They have not been verified. They remain, in the formal record, unconfirmed accounts. What has been confirmed is the absence. Amy Bradley was 23 years old. She was on a family vacation on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. She came back to her cabin at 3:40 in the morning and was asleep on her balcony at 5:30 in the morning when her father saw her. At 6 in the morning, she was gone. Between those two fixed points, a sleeping figure in a deck chair and an empty deck chair facing open water, something happened that has resisted every effort at explanation for more than 26 years. The ship was searched. The ocean was searched. The investigation reached into multiple countries and across multiple jurisdictions. Ron and Iva Bradley have never stopped looking for their daughter. They have given interviews across decades, maintained public pressure on the investigation, pursued every credible lead that has been brought to them, and kept Amy's face and name in circulation with the sustained determination of parents who refuse to accept that the Caribbean simply swallowed their daughter without leaving anything behind that could explain it. The ocean gave nothing back. Not her, not her belongings, not the 30 minutes that changed everything. Just a deck chair facing east into the morning, a railing with the sea behind it, and a family that looked away for half an hour and lost a person to the space between one glance and the next. Our last case gave back exactly enough to make it worse. A running engine, a swept windshield, and a riverbank that eventually told the story nobody wanted to hear. September 20th, 97. The geography shifts west and south from the Colonial Parkway corridor, moving away from the York River's tidal waters and into the broader James River basin, specifically toward a stretch of the James River near its mouth, where the river widens dramatically as it approaches the Chesapeake Bay, and the surrounding landscape transitions from the manicured historical park environment of the Parkway into something raw and more genuinely remote. The Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area sits on the south bank of the James River in Isle of Wight County, roughly 20 miles southwest of the Colonial Parkway's Yorktown terminus. Close enough to share the same general tidewater geography, the same low marshy terrain, the same network of rivers and inlets that define this section of coastal Virginia, but distinct enough in character and in jurisdiction to have been treated initially as a separate investigation rather than a connected case. The management area is exactly what its name suggests. A stretch of undeveloped wetland and riverside terrain managed for wildlife habitat rather than human recreation, accessible at its edges but genuinely wild in its interior. The kind of place where the ambient noise of the surrounding region fades almost immediately once you move away from the access points and into the marsh and tree cover. It is beautiful in the specific way of coastal Virginia wetland, egrets and osprey, river light on still water, the particular dense silence of a place that has not been developed or maintained for human comfort. It is also, in the relevant sections, genuinely isolated in the way that requires specific knowledge of the geography to navigate with any confidence after dark. David Knobling was 20 years old. He was known by the accounts of people who knew him as a young man who took pride in his truck. The particular pride of ownership that attaches itself to a vehicle in the way it sometimes does for people that age, where the truck is not just transportation, but an extension of identity and care, and the ordinary pleasures of maintaining something you've worked to have. His truck was his. He kept it well. The idea of leaving it running and unattended, the idea of walking away from it in any state of voluntary abandonment, was, by the accounts of those who knew him, simply not something David Knobling would do. Robin Edwards was 14 years old. The nature of their relationship and the specific circumstances that brought them together to the James River on the evening of September 20th, 1987, have been discussed in the case's public record over the years without producing a fully detailed public account of what they were doing at Ragged Island or how they came to be there. What is established is that they were together, that they were at the riverbank location on the evening of September 20th, and that something happened there that neither of them survived. The discovery began with the truck. David Knobling's truck was found abandoned near the James River Bridge, specifically at or near an access point in the Ragged Island area, in a location that connected to the riverside terrain where the case would ultimately resolve. The truck was not simply parked and empty in the ordinary sense. The engine was running. The windshield wipers were going back and forth, sweeping an arc across glass that had nothing on it, clearing a surface that didn't need clearing, moving in the particular mechanical patience of a system that operates without any awareness of the absence it is performing into. A running engine means the vehicle was not turned off before whoever was in it left. Wipers running means the departure happened in rain, or the wipers had been activated and were never switched off. Either way, the truck's systems were still cycling through their ordinary functions while the people who had been inside were already gone. That specific image, a truck with its wipers going in the dark, engine idling, nobody at the wheel, carries a particular kind of dread that is almost cinematic in its clarity, except that it is real and it is not dramatic staging. It is simply what David Knobling's truck looked like when someone found it. And the ordinariness of the mechanical motion against the absolute absence of the people is what makes it so difficult to set aside. Here's the critical detail. David Knobling's family knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Not because the truck being found in that location was inherently impossible, not because there was obvious violence visible at the scene, but because David would not leave his truck running and unattended. That knowledge, held by people who knew him well, translated instantly into certainty that whatever had happened here had not been his choice. A young man who takes care of his truck does not walk away from a running engine with the wipers going. The truck itself, in the specific context of who owned it and how he maintained it, was the first piece of evidence. Not a forensic finding, not a laboratory result, but the simple human knowledge that this didn't fit. His family knew before the investigation formally confirmed it. The search of the surrounding area, the riverbank, the marsh edges, the accessible sections of the Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area, produced, within days, what the truck's abandonment had already made almost certain. On September 23rd, 1987, 3 days after David and Robin were last accounted for, their bodies were recovered from the shore of the James River. They had been in or near the water. The recovery confirmed that both David Knobling and Robin Edwards were dead, confirmed it with the specific and devastating finality of physical recovery, which is both the worst possible outcome and the specific outcome that at least closes the question of whether they might be somewhere else. Alive in some set of circumstances, the investigation hasn't yet reached. The James River gave them back within 3 days. The York River, 18 months later, would not give back Richard Call and Cassie Haley at all. In that specific and terrible comparison, the families of David Nobling and Robin Edwards received something that the Call and Haley families were denied: the recovery, the funeral, the fixed geographic endpoint. It is not comfort, but it is a different kind of silence than the silence that follows when the river keeps everything. Now here is where the Nobling and Edwards case connects to the broader pattern that investigators and journalists and cold case researchers have examined across the full span of the Colonial Parkway series. And that connection requires careful handling because it involves both documented investigative conclusions and genuine evidentiary complexity. The structural similarities between the Nobling-Edwards case and the confirmed Colonial Parkway cases are substantial and specific. A couple, targeted together. A vehicle left at a riverside access point, abandoned in a state suggesting the departure was abrupt and unplanned. Engine running, wipers going. No indication that the occupants chose to leave the truck in that condition. A location that was accessible but genuinely isolated in the way of coastal Virginia waterfront terrain after dark. A scene that yielded minimal forensic evidence useful to the immediate investigation. The Ragged Island location is approximately 20 miles from the Yorktown section of the Colonial Parkway, where Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski were found the previous year, and 18 months separates the two cases. The geographic connection is not direct. The Ragged Island area is south of the James River, while the Colonial Parkway cases cluster north of the James between the York River and Williamsburg. But in the broader Tidewater geography, 20 miles and an 18-month interval, combined with the specific structural similarities of the cases, was enough for investigators to begin considering whether the same perpetrator or perpetrators were responsible. The FBI eventually grouped the Nobling and Edwards case within the broader Colonial Parkway series for investigative purposes, not as a confirmed linkage in the forensic sense, but as a working connection based on pattern analysis across the case's shared characteristics. That grouping has been discussed in FBI public statements and in the extensive journalism that has covered the Parkway series across 3 decades. It is, again, essential to frame this accurately. The investigative grouping is not the same as a forensic or legal determination that the cases were committed by the same person. It reflects the judgment of experienced investigators that the similarities across the cases are significant enough to treat them as potentially connected, and that the investigative resources applied to the series should incorporate the Ragged Island case, rather than treat it in complete isolation. The 2024 development connecting Alan Wade Wilmers Sr. to the Colonial Parkway series is relevant to the Nobling and Edwards case. In the same way, it is relevant to the other cases within the series that investigators have examined under Wilmer's name. Wilmer's background: a commercial fisherman with professional knowledge of the Tidewater waterways, someone who moved through the James River and York River geography in the course of his working life with the kind of familiarity that comes from years of active navigation rather than casual recreation, is consistent with someone who would know the Ragged Island area and its river access points with a specificity that goes beyond tourist knowledge. His knowledge of tidal patterns, of where the river moves and where it stills, of the seasonal and daily rhythms of the waterways in the region, would translate directly into the kind of geographic competency that the location choices in these cases appear to reflect. This remains, as with the other cases connected to Wilmer's name, an investigative determination made about a man who died before he could be formally charged or tried. The accountability structure of a living prosecution is not available. What exists is an investigative conclusion that has been stated publicly, attached to a name, and arrived at after decades of sustained work. And the specific frustration of a resolution that answers the question of who, while simultaneously foreclosing the legal mechanisms through which that answer could be tested and established in a courtroom. David Knobling's truck sat at the river access point with its engine running and its wipers going, while 3 days of searching unfolded in the marsh and along the riverbank. The James River, which held David Knobling and Robin Edwards in whatever portion of its current or its shallows received them after September 20th, gave them back on September 23rd to the people who had been searching its banks since the truck was found. The river is wide here, running toward its confluence with the Chesapeake Bay, moving with the particular unstoppable patience of a river that has been doing this for millennia without reference to the events on its banks. It keeps what it keeps. It returns what it returns. The Ragged Island marsh looks the same in any season. Low and flat and full of birds. The water moving through the reed beds in the wind, the James spreading out to the south toward the bay. You would not know, standing at the water's edge there, that anything had happened. The landscape has absorbed it completely and gives nothing away. A truck with its wipers still sweeping an empty windshield. An engine running in the dark by a river that was already deciding what it was going to keep and what it was going to give back. 2 people in the water, and the long patience of the tidewater geography holding everything in place until the investigation caught up. 10 cases, 10 places in Virginia. Some resolved in the legal sense, some still open, some answered by name but never by trial, some unanswered by any measure that matters to the people who are still waiting. The roads look exactly the same as they always did. So does the river. So does the parkway and the downtown mall and the gas station on Route 29 and the ship lane running south toward Curacao. Everything looks the same, and nothing that happened in any of those places has been fully, finally, satisfactorily explained to everyone who needs an explanation. That's the last case. But there's one more part. Because 10 cases across 40 years of Virginia's documented disappearances ask something of anyone who has followed them all the way through. And that question deserves its own space. Go back to the aerial image from the beginning of this video. A 2-lane road at dusk, Blue Ridge tree line bleeding into dark, mile markers ticking past, a pair of brake lights going red, then gone. Virginia looks like a postcard from up here. That is still true. It was true when Morgan Harrington walked out of a concert arena into a parking lot in 2009. It was true when Samantha Clark carried a house key out her front door just after midnight in 2010. It was true when Sage Smith walked toward a train station on a Tuesday evening in 2012. When Alexis Murphy tweeted 2 words and stopped for gas on Route 29 in 2013. When Hannah Graham sent a text saying she was lost and kept walking east away from home in 2014. When Caitlin Akins packed a suitcase for a flight she never boarded in 2015. It was true in 1986 and 1987 and 1988 and 1998. On a parkway and a riverbank and a ship deck and an overlook facing the York River. The landscape does not change to reflect what has happened in it. That is perhaps the most quietly unsettling truth that runs through every case in this video. Not that Virginia is uniquely dangerous, not that these places were identifiably sinister before the events that defined them, but that they looked exactly right until they didn't. Now the map has 10 pins in it. Pull back and look at what they tell you, not individually, we've done that, but together, as a pattern across time and geography and circumstance. The first thing the pattern tells you is that isolation is not a prerequisite. 3 of these cases unfolded in the heart of a mid-sized university city. Morgan Harrington on the lit perimeter of a sold-out arena. Hannah Graham on a pedestrian mall covered by surveillance cameras across a mile-long documented route. Sage Smith on a busy downtown sidewalk beside an active train station. These were not remote locations. They were not places where the absence of other people created the conditions for something to happen unobserved. They were crowded or lit or both. And the presence of other people, of cameras, of ambient public activity, provided neither protection nor useful witness testimony in any of the three cases. What the concentration of Charlottesville cases tells you when you hold all three together is something specific and uncomfortable about the limits of what public visibility actually guarantees. We have spent decades building the assumption that cameras and crowds make places safe, that being seen is equivalent to being protected. Hannah Graham's mile-long surveillance record dismantles that assumption with a specificity that no amount of subsequent smart city infrastructure planning has fully answered. The second thing the pattern tells you is about time. Look at the gaps. Morgan Harrington's remains were found 3 months after she disappeared. Alexis Murphy's remains were found 7 years after her conviction and 17 years after her disappearance. 7 years during which a man sat in prison serving 2 life sentences, and her location remained unknown. Sage Smith's case was reclassified to homicide 4 years after her disappearance, and a person of investigative interest was located 13 years later in the process of changing his name. The Colonial Parkway cases ran for 3 years before the series was fully recognized as a series, and remained unsolved for 38 years before a name was publicly attached to them. A name belonging to a man already dead, beyond the reach of any trial. Caitlin Akins has been missing for nearly a decade, with no confirmed account of what happened between a suburban drop-off and a suitcase in a drainage ditch. These timelines are not aberrations. They are the operating reality of cases in which terrain, jurisdiction, institutional capacity, and the deliberate actions of whoever is responsible all work together against rapid resolution. Justice, when it comes in cases like these, tends to arrive in the wrong tense: past, conditional, partial. The third thing is about what gets left behind and what those objects mean. A cell phone with a battery removed in a parking lot between an arena and a railroad bridge. Morgan Harrington. A house key carried out the door by a girl in her pajamas who told her brother she'd be back in the morning. Samantha Clark. A white Nissan Maxima in an Albemarle County parking lot, 20 miles in the wrong direction from where it was supposed to go. Alexis Murphy. A wallet and a purse and clothing and keys still in the ignition at a river overlook. Richard Call and Cassie Haley. A suitcase with an Arizona ID in a roadside ditch in Spotsylvania. Caitlin Akins. A deck chair facing open ocean at 6 in the morning. Amy Bradley. A truck with its wipers going and its engine running by the James River. David Knobling. The things left behind in these cases are not random. They are not the debris of ordinary departure. They are, each of them, specific arguments in physical form, objects that carry the logic of a life interrupted mid-motion, things that were in use or in hand or in the ordinary cycle of being carried and then suddenly were not, because something happened in between. Each one is a question in object form. Each one has been sitting somewhere in an evidence room or a case file for years, still waiting for a final answer that some of them will never receive. The fourth thing the pattern tells you is about who gets looked for and how fast and with what resources. Sage Smith's case has been discussed publicly and extensively by her community and by advocates working on behalf of missing transgender individuals in terms of the institutional response in the immediate period after her disappearance. The pace, the resource allocation, the public urgency relative to other cases with similar fact patterns involving different victims. The families of David Knobling and Robin Edwards, and of the Colonial Parkway victims, spent decades navigating the specific frustration of interagency jurisdictional complexity on cases that cross the boundary between federal parkland and state territory. Alexis Murphy's family waited 7 years after a conviction to find out where their daughter was. The differences in outcome across these 10 cases: who was found quickly, who was found years later, who has not been found at all, whose perpetrator was convicted, whose perpetrator died before charges were filed, whose case remains open with no named suspect. Those differences are not random, and they are not entirely explained by the specific facts of each individual case. They reflect the accumulated weight of institutional choices about resource allocation, investigative priority, and the specific vulnerabilities that make certain people easier targets and certain cases harder to solve. Now here is what the resolution record actually looks like across the 10 cases, because it matters to hold this clearly rather than letting the documentary format smooth it into a false uniformity of outcome. Jesse Matthew was convicted of the murders of Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham and is serving multiple life sentences. 2 cases with legal resolution, though the specific circumstances of both disappearance nights contain gaps and the public record has never fully closed. Randy Taylor was convicted of the abduction of Alexis Murphy and is serving 2 life sentences, legal resolution, with a 7-year geographic gap between conviction and recovery. The Colonial Parkway cases have a name attached to them: Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. But no trial, no conviction, no living defendant, and no complete public accounting of the evidentiary basis for each individual case connection. Samantha Clark's case was reclassified to abduction and murder in 2021, but carries no public charge against any named individual. Sage Smith's case was reclassified to homicide in 2016. A person of interest was located in Los Angeles in 2025, attempting to change his name, and no charge has been filed. Caitlin Akins remains missing, her case open across multiple agencies, with a 2026 arrest of her stepfather on separate sex-related charges, naming her as a victim, but not resolving her disappearance. Amy Bradley has been missing since 1998, with no confirmed sightings, no physical recovery, and no named perpetrator in any legal document. That is the resolution record. 3 convictions, 1 investigative naming without trial, 4 open cases with no legal resolution, and 1 case, Amy Bradley, that has produced 26 years of investigative effort without a single confirmed answer. What does that record tell you? It tells you that resolution, in the true sense of the word, not just the legal sense, not just the forensic sense, but the human sense of understanding what happened and why and to whom and at whose hands, is genuinely rare in cases like these. It tells you that the systems built to find missing people and identify those responsible for their disappearance are capable of remarkable things across sustained periods of time, and also that those same systems are subject to the ordinary pressures of resource constraint and jurisdictional complexity and evidentiary limitation that produce the 7-year gaps and the 38-year gaps and the 26-year silences that run through these cases like a structural feature of the landscape itself. It also tells you something about the people who kept pushing. Gil and Dan Harrington, who kept Morgan's name public for years and lived to see a conviction. The Bradley family, who have given interviews across 26 years and never stopped pressing the investigation. The community in Charlottesville that held vigils for Sage Smith and has sustained public pressure on her case through more than a decade of institutional slow movement. Alexis Murphy's grandmother and family, who waited through 7 years of geographic silence after a verdict that gave them accountability, but not location. The families of the Colonial Parkway victims, who waited through 38 years of investigative opacity for something that arrived, finally, in 2024, in the form of a name belonging to a dead man. These are not peripheral figures in these cases. They are, in many documented instances, the reason the cases remained active, rather than fading into the administrative category of cold files that nobody is currently working. The families and communities of the missing are frequently the most sustained investigative pressure the cases receive. That is both a tribute to the people doing that work and an indictment of the structural conditions that make it necessary. Go back to the specific images that opened and closed each case in this video, because they are the things that stay with you. A phone with its battery removed on a parking lot surface, unable to ring even if someone had tried. A porch light burning over a door that never opened from the outside again. A train platform where an appointment was scheduled and not kept, or kept in a way that wasn't survived. A gas station camera recording a parking lot on a Route 29 afternoon. A freeze frame on a downtown mall storefront, a figure moving out of the shot, the timestamp still advancing. An airport gate that opened and closed for everyone except one ticketed passenger. A Honda on a parkway embankment below the sight line of passing traffic, fuel doused and failed to burn. A car at a river overlook with the keys in and the valuables inside and nobody at the wheel. A deck chair facing east into Caribbean morning light. A truck with its wipers sweeping an empty windshield by the James River. 10 images. 10 fixed points in the public record of Virginia's documented disappearances across 4 decades. Most of the people they belong to have been found in the physical sense, recovered, identified, given back to their families in the specific limited way that remains represent giving back. A few have not. And even the ones who are found, even the cases with convictions attached to them, carry interior gaps that the public record has never fully illuminated. The 30 minutes on a balcony, the window between a parking lot and a hayfield 10 miles away, the gap between a gas station camera and a wooded stretch of Route 29 that held its answer for 7 years. The roads look exactly the same tomorrow morning. The Colonial Parkway will be beautiful in the early light, the tree-covered dents on both sides. The river overlooks, facing the same water they always have. Route 29 will carry its ordinary traffic south through Nelson County, past the Liberty Station in Lovingston, through the landscape that kept it secret for 7 years. The downtown mall in Charlottesville will be lit and social and full of students on weekend evenings, cameras covering the length of it, recording faithfully and continuously. The James River will move toward the bay, with the patient indifference of a river that has been doing so since before anyone was there to watch it. Interstate 95 will run north through Spotsylvania toward the airport corridor, carrying its ordinary volume of weekend travelers. And somewhere on the Caribbean shipping lanes, the same water that gave nothing back in March 1998 will be moving under the same open sky it always has. The map has 10 pins in it now. The roads look exactly the same. A car door closes quietly on a dark shoulder somewhere in Virginia. Then, nothing. If these cases matter to you, and the fact that you're still here at the end of this tells me they do, subscribe and stay with us. There's more road to cover.